Well, my name is Songgun Kim, and I was born on the island of Hawaii to be precise, in 1923. I'm 82 years old, and I'm the last and only son of my parents, Mr. Hong Sun Kim, and my mother, Pak Young Jin. I had four other sisters, two of them who have already passed away. And
Can you name your sisters? Or?
my oldest sister is Rachel. She's still surviving. She's 90 years old. And my second sister, Florence, passed away about 5 years ago. And my third sister is here in Honolulu, married to Clarence Choi.
Oh, yeah.
And
I think I met her.
my fourth sister passed away. In fact, my youngest sister passed away before my second sister. So I have two sisters left and myself. As the only son in a Korean family, I thought it was my duty to take care of my parents. And so it just came about naturally because my sisters all got married before I did. And I was the only single one left. And so I took care of my parents for, I think, the last 25, 30 years of their lives. As I was growing up, I remember Dr. Sungman Rhee coming to our house for dinner. This was in the early 1930s, I believe. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old at that time. He came with Francesca, his new bride then, and our pastor of the Korean Christian Church in Wahiwa. Incidentally, our pastor, Pak Dong-wan, was one of the group of Koreans who demonstrated against the Japanese in March of, I forgot what year it was, in that movement, Korean independence movement. And he was captured and he was tortured by the Japanese with hot coals. They held hot coals on his fingertips and gradually worked their way up to the arm, all the way up to the arm, on both hands, wanting him to name all the other demonstrators, which he refused. And so they started going up the neck. And so his entire torso on the upper part was severely burned and scarred from the hot cold torture.
What is his name again?
Pak Dong-wan.
Pak.
P-A-R-K-D-O-N-G-W-A-N, I believe. Pak Dong-wan. And so he was our pastor and our Korean school teacher. We had a language school after English school. And so I attended Korean school for several years under the tutelage of Dr. Reverend Pak Dong-wan. And I think being associated with him through my parents, incidentally, I was one of his favorite students because I was the only son, and he took a liking to me and asked me to care for his plants when he went in a hospital. And I used to go and water the plants and keep the plants going. And so he was appreciative of that. And plus, I felt an obligation to him. Young as I was involved in this movement, the independence movement. And so that always stayed with me for some reason. I like to think that our local Koreans in Hawaii are more patriotic than the Koreans because we know our heritage. We remember the times when we were under Japanese rule, and we know the suffering that they went through, especially the leaders, and so all through life that stayed with me. And after years and years of attending church, I finally became a Christian, you know. In fact, it wasn't until after I had 3 children after marriage that even the miracle of birth did not move me. But I felt like I had to go to church because I was the only son, obedient to my parents, and it made them happy. So even as an adult, I went to the Korean Christian Church after a long absence. You know, after World War II began, I stopped going to church naturally because I wasn't home, you know. And after I got out of the army after World War II, I went to farming for a short while. I spent 7 years farming. It was a hard life, and I was raising livestock, hogs, breeding stock. I raised the little piglets until they were 8 weeks old, and then I'd sell them to the middlemen. They'd feed them garbage and fatten them for the market. Well, in 1949, there was a big waterfront strike, and ILWU locally, they were fighting for recognition as a union, and so there was no feed for my livestock. And so I got some of the boys at Waialae, living in the Waialae Kahala area, to go around picking up kiawe beans for me. You know, I supplied them the bags, and I'd give them $2 a bag. And that kept me going for a while. Then the strike was still on, and the kiawe beans stopped falling. The season was over. And so I had to sell all of my breeding stock to the Portuguese sausage people. And they butchered the purebred stock that I had to make Portuguese sausage. And that was the end of my farming. Yeah.
But my family was in the Waialae.
Yes, your Auntie Esther.
And she was in Lunaleo home at the Carnation.
Yeah, it was right across the street from my parents. See, my parents were growing flowers also.
Okay.
But I had my piggery a mile away, above Lunaleo home.
Then my uncle, my mom's side, were pig farmers too, you know. But in Waimanalo, you know Larry, right?
Yeah, Larry.
And then Robert and all this.
Yeah, Larry was a carnation grower.
Yeah, he was in Waimanalo too.
Yeah, and my parents were carnation growers.
Wow.
And I used to give them a hand, you know, once in a while. In fact, after I had to give up my piggery, I told my parents, why don't you shift operations to my land? Because I have virgin soil, you know, carnations never grew there before. And your land is kind of old and infected with nematodes and anthracnose and a lot of different diseases. And so they thought it was a good idea, and so we moved operations to my farm. I had a bigger acreage, I had 4.5 acres compared to their 3 acres. And so for the first year, we were doing real well until a winter storm hit and just washed out everything that we had. And so the second year, we started again. And again, a big storm just washed out everything. My land was too hilly.
So what year was this now?
It was in 1951 and 52. And so my whole, all our efforts were for naught. So I gave up farming and went to Pearl Harbor. And that's when I met your uncle, Chin Chan, Francis.
That's my father.
Yeah, he was your father, rather.
Yeah.
And he was working in Shop 51 like I was, you know. I was born on the big island of Hawaii, like I said, and we came over when I was a young baby.
What was the exact date of your birth?
I was born on November 4th, 1923. And my first recollection of being on Oahu was in a Kunia camp. I'd wait for my sisters to come home on the truck. Plantation truck used to bring them home from school. And I remember on Saturdays, our auntie used to call me and my sisters and give us water rice chuk. You know, she made it out of boiled rice, and she added cream and sugar and gave us chuk, mush actually. and I enjoyed that very much.
You used to talk in Korean with your auntie. And,
We talked in Korean with our aunties. We conversed in Korean and broken English with our parents because our parents didn't speak English.
yeah.
And so, as youngsters, we were pretty good in Korean. Probably better than the average, and especially since we went to Korean school, after English school.
Where was this Korean school?
Your Korean school was at the church, the old church
The old church in Hawai'i.
in Wahiawa.
And then this old church is still existing.
It's still in existence. The building is still there. And the other one was also
Oh, yeah.
down in the lower part on Olive Avenue.
Olive Avenue.
That's why it's called Olive Methodist.
I
They
see.
moved from Olive Street to their new location, but the original Methodist church was still on
Olive Street.
Olive
And it's
Street.
still there.
The building, I think, is still there.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez.
My other recollection was after we moved from Kunia, my mother used to work at the Wahiawa Hotel. It's not there now. The Wahiawa Hotel was right at where the Wahiawa Civic Center is now. And she left me home with our neighbor, who also moved from Kunia, the Kim family. My neighbor had a son my age, Song Obi, and me, Songon. So we were playing always together. But I always kept myself clean. And so Song Op's mother used to rub dirt on me and say, "Get dirty like Song Op, be a boy and get dirty."
Is he still around?
No, she passed away.
Oh, I mean, it's Songop.
Song Op is still available
Oh, yeah?
around. His name is Joseph. Incidentally, people call me Joe. It's not my legal name. But Song Op's name was also Joseph. Joseph.
And he lives in the Wahiawa area.
No, he's in town somewhere.
Oh,
Chin Han
yeah.
was an editor of the Korean Weekly. The office used to be on King Street. The building is still there.
The building's still there.
Still there, yeah.
Do you know what,
And
what cross street?
it's on King Street in the Kalihi area. Yeah, just outside of Paloma.
Oh.
Just outside of
Going
Paloma, going toward Kalihi.
Going to Scully on King Street, yeah.
Yeah, on King Street on the Mackay side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as you're going down King Street, that side, I know the left side. There's this
Near the fire station.
Fire station,
Yeah,
fire
yeah. I think it's just about where the fire station is.
just past that.
Just past that.
Wow.
After Park Jin-han, I think Donald King took
Donald
over
King, yeah.
as editor for a while.
Yeah, my dad's friend.
Yeah. And incidentally, the Tongji Hair owned that building.
Oh, okay. That King Street building.
Yeah, and we sold that
Uh-huh.
in the early 50s. I think it was 52. We sold that building.
What was the name of the building? Do you remember?
I don't know. Anyway, the proceeds of that, Dr. Song Min-ri suggested we give to Incheon, so they could start a school there.
Yeah.
More like a vocational school.
Inhwa University.
So Inha,
Inha.
In for Incheon,
Yeah.
and the first two letters of Hawaii.
Yeah.
So Inha.
Inha University.
Yeah, first two letters of
Oh,
both.
that's interesting.
We were in fairly good contact with them, because we gave, I think it was about 250,000 or a little over
Wow.
as
That's
seed
big money.
money. Yeah, at that time it was good seed money. But over a period of time, they wanted to expand, I guess, and the Korean Airlines bought controlling interest in the school.
Oh.
I thought it was a municipal school, but evidently management changed. And ever since Korean Airlines took over, we lost communications with them. And then a while later, there was a rumor going on campus that the Koreans, communists from Hawaii, gave seed money for this school. Because Tongji, the word Tongji is comrade. And ever since the Korean War, I don't think they use the word Tongji anymore. It's
Tongji refers
Chingu, a friend, Chingu or Tongmu, but they don't. they tried to get away from using the word Tongji. And so the students said, the communists from Korea gave the seed money for this school. And some of the vice presidents heard about it and talked among themselves and said, we can't let this happen. You know, we can't let this go on. Let's take these students and take them to Hawaii to show them who our benefactors were, you know. And so they came with many students, several students. They came to Hawaii and we had a dinner together, the old members of the Tongji here and these students and the vice presidents. And so they finally got the word correctly, that they were not a bunch of communists, but a bunch of grandmothers and grandfathers, all elderly people, you know, who were, you know, who felt the need that Korea had and donated their proceeds. So that was finally straightened out. I remember one occasion where my mother hosted Dr. Song Man-ri and his bride, Francesca, and our pastor, Pak Dong-wan, to dinner. And we all sat, well, not we all, my four sisters had to sit on chairs on the side because there was no room on the table. But I sat there because I was the only son. And I fit in because there was just enough room for me. Dr. Song Man-ri, his wife, my parents, and Reverend Dong-wan, Pop Dong-wan, and myself. So there were 6 of us on the table. And I remember my mother being very disappointed because Mrs. Ri didn't eat certain food. And
she's Australian.
Yeah, she was a new bride and not accustomed to Korean food. And my father was such a devoted Song Man-ri follower that whatever Song Man-ri did was okay, you know. He said, that's okay. She will learn in time to eat Korean food like all of us. Which made my mother feel a little better, okay. Well, anyway, that was something that I always remembered, that they let me sit on the table.
Did you socialize a lot with the Koreans? There were many Koreans in this area?
There were a lot of Koreans in the Kunia Wahiwa area, Kunia Wahiwa Wailua, and Eva.
And Eva, sorry.
Yeah. In fact, Eva probably had more in the early days than any other place. And that's why Dr. Ri started a church in Eva. Eva. And then...
Is that church still in existence?
No.
Oh, it's gone.
And then Wahiwa, and then Hilo. So there were 3 Korean churches, Korean Christian churches. Honolulu, Wahiwa, and Eva. And then later on Hilo, 4 rather.
4.
But Eva closed up earlier than the rest because people moved out of the Eva plantation. Most Koreans moved out.
So
And in the Kunia area, a lot of them moved out to the town of Wahiwa, out of the plantation.
So the Korean church is still existing in Wahiwa,
Yeah.
and it's still, of course, in Honolulu. Is the Korean church in Hilo still?
Yes.
It still is?
Yeah, it's pretty active, in fact, now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. For a while, they were, kind of dormant, but now it's kind of reactivated.
So there are many Koreans in Hilo?
There are quite a few Koreans.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And the Wahiwa Church had to join the UCC,
What's that?
United Church of Christ,
Oh, okay.
which is a congregational denomination, mainly because they had to increase their attendance, membership, and the only way would be to reach out into the community, because the Korean community is dwindling, and people are moving out. Either Wahiwa people are moving to Mililani or going in town, and so it could not support a Korean, strictly Korean church. They tried bilingual for a while. They tried 2 congregation, Korean and English, but it never worked out. And so the Koreans just folded up. And so the remainder joined the UCC.
I noticed that at the Korean Christian Church in Liha, they have the minister talks in both English
Yeah.
and Korean.
Yeah.
And I know, and also with the one in Kemoku Street is actually mainly Korean. Yeah.
Yeah.
They talk.
Yeah. Well, mainly, I think because, you know, the Kemoku Church was bilingual like our
Before,
church.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
all
in
I
fact, they
remember.
did the same thing. I think they had a Korean service and English service. I may be wrong.
Yeah, they did. I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah.
And we had two at one time. And now we're going back to the Korean speaking, English speaking, and the bilingual. We have 3 services now.
Wow.
We're trying it out. And you know, surprisingly, most of them opted to join the Korean speaking group.
Wow.
And so the bilingual is pretty small now.
Oh, yeah.
Although many Korean speaking come to the bilingual because, you know, they built friendships with the younger and the older Koreans, but bilingual Koreans, basically English speaking. And so since we socialized, they joined our group. But there'll be a time, I think, that we will have to join the English speaking and become an English speaking.
So you're in the Korean speaking services.
I'm in the bilingual.
Oh, bilingual.
Yeah, because I don't know enough Korean to attend a Korean service, you know. My Korean is real basic and limited.
So, but when you were growing up, you spoke pretty fluently. You had to.
I did because I had to. Like I said, I lived with my parents, you know, and we never spoke English at home.
Can you talk about when you're growing up and you going to the Korean language school?
Yeah.
How was it like? Can you describe the school, the teachers, and those things?
I attended Korean school after the regular English school, like most other kids did, a lot of other kids did. And school was very rigid. Our instructor, Pak Dong-wan, was a very militaristic type of instructor. And he'd bring out his stick and whack you, you know, if you didn't behave. And, you know, he was famous for just giving you a whack on the back or on the arm or someplace. And
So
but
how
like
did he teach you? I mean,
yeah, he was, but he was a good teacher. And one thing I will remember always is that he never spoke of the Japanese as Japanese. He said "wenom,"
Bueno.
"wenom." You know, it was kind of derogatory
Yeah.
way of describing a Japanese. You know, "wenom." I don't know what it really means. I think probably
Foreigner.
foreigner above us or something.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
There's all kind of terms. I know my grandfather used to use it all the time.
Yeah.
But he used to add other, you know,
Other-
other very, very vulgar words next to it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That was a fact of life, you know, that he could not, even being a Christian, I think he could not forget all the torture he went through.
Yeah.
You know.
So in the school, of course, he talked about the politics. He talked about the history.
No, he never talked about the politics.
What do you mean is that, you know, he did talk about the Japanese like that?
Only when he referring to
Oh,
them,
okay,
you know.
okay.
But he never talked politics.
Oh, I
He just stuck strictly to the lesson,
The Kageo,
Kagyo Kogyo, and some simple Hanmun, you know,
Uh-huh.
and the correct way to write the Hanmun.
Well, he taught you all those Chinese
Yeah,
characters. Then.
right.
Ah. So to this day, you still can read these
Some,
things?
yeah. I read Kunmun.
Uh-huh.
You know, I have to, because when I sing in the bilingual, we switch verses, right? English and Korean, and I go along with that switch. So when it's English, I read the English part, and when it's Korean, I switch to the next page. And our hymnal is like that. And so our hymnal has 2 522, let's say, you know, one in Korean, one in English.
Young kids.
You know, when we were kids, naturally we did everything the other kids did. You know, we played sandlot baseball.
Oh yeah.
Incidentally, we were too poor to have gloves and bats and balls. And so there was a neighbor across the street there, the house right next to that gray house.
Let's see if I can.
His mother was,
Outside here.
yeah, you can't see it
Oh, I
from
can't
here.
see it from here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, his father was automobile salesman, and the mother was a Japanese school teacher, right here at the Hongwanji temple. And he was the only boy, and so they bought him bats and balls and gloves and everything. And so we used to go over and call him, "Hey, Masahiko, come on, let's play." So he'd run out, bring his balls and bats and gloves, and we'd go in a sand lot where the Baptist church is now. It was a vacant lot, and play baseball and football and everything. But we were so poor that when I started going to high school
And you went to school where?
at Lelehua,
Lelihua.
I went to Wahiwahi and then to Lelehua. My sister Rachel got married in 1941, I think, or 40. Well, anyway, even before she got married, when I was 14 years old, I had to deliver laundry. That my parents were in the laundry business. I had to deliver and collect laundry and bring it home to be washed. And so after school, that was my job, delivery boy. And so I had to get a driver's license, but I was only 14. And so my parents went to the bank with me and had a notarized statement that I was 16. And so I had to go all the way in town to get my driver's license. And I was only about 5 feet tall then, you know. And so I had to put a cushion under the seat and on the back. And naturally there was no automatic shift. And the policeman told me, "Okay, go up to Punch Bowl." And you know one of those steep hills?
Yeah.
That was standard, you know, that you had to stop on the top, at the incline and start from scratch.
Like on the top of Ward Avenue, huh?
Yeah, on the side, Pelly.
Yeah.
And many of them failed that test, but I passed that, you know. But the policeman was kind of leery about my age. He asked me, why are you so anxious to drive? And I told him the truth. I said, I have to work. After school, I had to deliver the laundry and go pick up laundry for my parents. They're in the business. So I guess he gave me a break. And besides, I passed the driving test.
Yeah.
And so I got my license. For years, I couldn't use my regular name because I used Joseph S.G. Kim on my license.
S.G.?
Yeah. And my legal name was Songgun, Song S-U-N-G-K-U-N. And so in 1941, after World War II broke out, there was a re-identification drive, and we all had to get new driver's license. And it just so happened that a friend of mine was working on the desk, and she said, "Anything you want to change?" I said, "Yes, I want to change my name." And so she changed my name and gave the correct date. And so today I have my correct date and name on my driver's license. I graduated in 1941. I was the last class that graduated at the old Lelehua School, which is now Wheeler. After the World War started, the 42 students never did graduate. In fact, they just recently had their diploma granted to them. And then the school moved to the present site here. Well, you know, as I was growing up, most of my friends, I had a few Korean friends because the community was so big. But most of my classmates, close friends, were Japanese. And when war broke out, I felt that they were just like me because we grew up together. And I had no doubt about their patriotism, you know. And so when my friend Shigeru Kawahara said, "I'm going to join the army," I said, "No, don't do that," you know, because I was in the army already. He said, "No, I can't stand it. People calling me a Jap." He was working at the PX. I said, well, they're going to call you a Jap even after the war. Like they're going to call me a Yobo after the war. Because we look like that. And you're not going to escape what you look like. So I said, oh, but I can't stand it. I have to join. And so he joined the army. And he was sent to Camp Shelby, Mississippi for basic training. Then one incident he told me about was he had a date with a local girl there, a Caucasian, and so they were going in Camp Shelby, and so they were going in town to see a movie. And a deputy saw him and called him over and grabbed him by the collar. And,
deputy, you mean the police officer?
Deputy sheriff, yeah, from the town. He grabbed him by the collar and said, you get back in camp. If I ever see you with a white woman again, I'll kill you. And so he went back to camp. He said that one incident he told me made him wake up, to what he was. And then another thing what happened was he was shipped to Italy and they hit the beachhead. And that's all he remembered, hitting the beachhead. The next thing, he was in coma for days and days. The next thing that he remembered was he was in a hospital in Texas. And the guy next door said, what's that Jap doing in this hospital? Referring to him, And so when he was eventually moved to St. Louis College in Waialae Avenue, it was turned into a...
St. Louis High School.
Yeah, it was changed into a hospital.
Yeah.
They had bunks and beds in there. It was changed. I went to visit him. And as soon as he saw me, he started crying. He said, I should have listened to you. He said, half my body is gone. I'm paralyzed. He said, I'm still a Jap.
And even though he served his country.
Yeah. So I said, well, what's done is done. We just have to make the best of it. So, we just have to, you have to do the best you can after you get rehabilitated. They sent him to eventually to Los Angeles, a VA rehabilitation center. And he was doing fine. They equipped him with a car with automatic push-button drive, which was fairly new in those days, and just coming out, in fact. And they found him a job at Hughes Tool Company in Los Angeles. So he used to drive from Reseda to downtown Los Angeles and run a machine lathe. And one day they called him in, and they said, we have to let you go. And he said, why? He said, I'm putting out as much work as anyone else, even though I'm half, my left is gone, I still do the same job that other people are doing. The machines can't go any faster,
And you want to let him go?
They had to let him go. Then he found out that they had to create ethnic balance. So he was replaced by a black man. And when he found that out, he was devastated. Oh, and let me go back a little further. And then he said, I had a chance to change my name too. He said, but I didn't. I told him I didn't have my name changed. He said, I kept my name. He said, at least I didn't change my name, And then he said, you married a Korean from Korea. I married a Japanese from Japan, He said, you name your son first name, Japanese name. I name my son Osama, But his motive was because he was bitter, He wasn't American. He felt he wasn't considered American, a loyal American. They still looked down on him as a Jap, even though he was paralyzed, disabled, He
served his country.
Yeah, but he was a bitter man. And I tried to console him every time he came, So eventually he got that out of his system. But he said, but I'll never work again. I'll let the VA support me. Yeah, he was my buddy. We used to play hooky together. Because I never had fun because I had to come home and work. So I played hooky a lot. He and I played hooky a lot. We'd go up the reservoir, way up the top. There's no trail there even. We'd go down the ravine, and there's clear fresh water there. So clear that you can see the boulders on the bottom. and the fresh water runs down into the dam. In fact, my children spent many summer days in the mountains there, doing the same thing I did. And we used to hike all the way up to Kole Kole Pass from here. Can you imagine? The morning of the attack, your auntie Siberia came running to my house. And there were no houses there, here, you know. My house, I used to live in that house next door. And
Next right here?
Yeah.
This exact house?
Yeah, that house there. Okay. And up on that side, there was only one house. This was all grass. This is all California grass. And she ran up from Rose Street because there was no houses there, just a trail that we used to go down the shortcut. And she ran up telling my mother, my pipe burst. What happened was, as the second wave of attackers came, our fighters already were airborne, some of them, and they were shooting at the planes that were bombing Wheeler. And as they dropped their bombs and came up, is when our fighter planes intercepted them and started shooting at them before they could go. Yeah, and the bullets went and hit your auntie's house.
Wow.
One of the steel bullets, because I think every fifth was a tracer and some of them were steel, I think. Well, anyway, that steel bullet went through this roof to the floor and hit the pipe, galvanized pipe.
Wow.
And the water just burst out.
People could have been hurt then.
Yeah, people couldn't get. In fact, my cousin who lived on the corner there, one house in the corner, she was going to dive under the bed because the machine gun bullets were just spraying the yard. And as she was going under the bed, she got hit on the hip.
She did get hit.
She got hit. And so my cousin took her to the hospital at Wailua because you couldn't go in Schofield, you know, it was just havoc. And so they went to Wailua and they sent her back. They said, nothing we can do. So she died with a bullet in her years later. In fact, she was the administrator of the Korean care home, Martha Chung. Yeah, she was the administrator. That bullet was never removed. Even at that time, I was just out of high school, you know, and during my school years, I bought myself a pipe threading kit because I was taking Future Farmers of America, you know, FFA, and I was raising chickens. And I had to make a sprinkler system for my chickens to drink water on a nipple. Yeah, so I bought this kit just to do that. And she remembered that I knew how to do those things. So my friend who lived down the corner and I went down the store. Luckily it was open, a plumbing supply store, Sugimoto. It was open, and so we bought a union. And so he and I went, we cut the pipe, we threaded it and put the union on. And it stayed there until this guy Perez repiped, I think.
Wow. How long was that? How long did it last?
It lasted until, I think Jimmy Perez bought the house maybe 20 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. Then after the war, I went into farming, of all things, because there were people who were really earning good money farming. One of the guys I knew had a bumper crop of tomato past Cocoa Head in a blowhole area. And I don't know how long his record stand, but he harvested 55 tons per acre of tomato. And that was when you could sell every tomato that you got. And so, you know, he made a pile just in that one crop. Well, anyway, pig raisers were making a lot of money. Pig raisers. So I went into raising pigs. I had purebred Hampshire stock and I had purebred Tamworth boar. And that combination gave you lean meat, you know, with a lot of belly pork.
That's the bacon.
And for bacon. And Chinese like the lean long one for the sweet pork. And
this is all in the Cocoa Head side.
Yeah. And so I was raising for a couple of years only, though, because in '49 that big strike, you know, hit. and so I had to give up. And then 2 years after that, the Carnation were wiped out, and so I quit, and we moved back to our old home.
Waiwa.
Yeah. Then I went to Pearl Harbor.
Oh, Pearl Harbor. Oh, for 9 months.
Right. And then I quit, and I was looking for a job, and my brother-in-law, who was working at KGMB, said, hey, they need a man in the studio. He was a transmitter man. He said, why don't you apply? So I applied, and I got the job because I had electronic training in the Army. I went to signal school, and I learned radio radar. And in the Army, I was in charge of the radio target plane control center. They call it RCAT, Radio Control Aircraft Target. And I worked there for 7.5 years. Then the station changed ownership. The original owners were the Mormon Church, the Consolidated, and the Star Bulletin. They all had one share, 1/3 share, equal share. But Star Bulletin bought out Consolidated and
Consolidated Theaters.
yeah, and the Mormon Church.
And the Mormon Church.
And it's Mormon Church. And the chief engineer eventually moved to Channel 4. So I asked him if he could take me along, you know. He said, well, I'm taking the supervisor, I can't take you too. I said, hey, I'll work for whatever you're giving your other guys, you know. He said, we give him $400 a month. I said, that's what I make here, you know, after 7 years. You know. So he said, well, if you're willing to start at that wage, by all means, come on over. So I went and I worked for him.
Channel 4.
Channel 4.
And that's KITV. Right
KITV. It was KHVH.
Oh, KHVH. Yeah.
Kaiser owned it. Henry
Kaiser.
Kaiser. And so I worked for Henry Kaiser station. I worked at KHVH for 35 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were a radio
What, 25, well, for the rest of the 35 years. Yeah, so I'd say 23 years, yeah. Well, yeah, and I retired from that.
Your mother came from what part of Korea?
She came from Busan.
Oh, Busan.
And I visited my uncle in Busan when we went there. We both visited. We stopped by and we visited. We didn't go to North Korea, naturally, where my father was from.
Your father was from Pyongyang, though?
Yeah, Pyongyang. He was from Uiju, way up north.
Uiju?
Yeah, Uiju.
Oh, okay.
Way up north. He said he could hear the dogs barking across the border. My father, you know, I think he deceived my mother when he gave his age, because he was much older than what he claimed to be, I think. Because there was a man in Wahiwa who used to call my father Hyungnim. Hyungnim means older brother, right? And he told us that when we were kids, your father used to carry me on his back, obo. He used to obo me across streams that I couldn't cross. So that meant my father was older or bigger, right? And my father was only 5'2", you know. And so he wasn't a big man. So I feel he was older. Because that man passed away at 95, and my father was still alive. So, you know, that makes me quite sure that my father was much older. My mom never talked much, but my mom was very well educated for Korean. She went to Seoul to go to school.
Oh. Do you know
And so, no, I don't. But the rest of the ladies that came from Busan all had that dialect, you know, and right away I recognized the dialect, you know, that the Gyeongsangdo, yeah, Sotari, you know, Satori. But my mother never spoke like that. But I don't remember my father saying much about Korea because he was an orphan and lived with his aunt and uncle. And as a young man, he left early, left home.
His parents, do you know how his parents passed away?
No, he doesn't even remember himself. But apparently he hung out with a lot of scholars because he was well versed in the Korean language, you know, in the written language especially. He knew all Hanmun, And what my mother didn't know, she would ask him, and he'd tell her. And whenever we went to any pineapple camp, people used to come to us and have my father read the letters that they received.
Write the letters.
Yeah, and also answer. When it's time for answering, they'd come and tell him what they wanted to answer. And so he would sit down like this with his knee like this, with his pad like that, and write. In fact, he used to write love stories and give it to my wife. You know, he sit under a tree there. I had a tree there. He sit there and write love stories and give it to my wife. And sometimes my wife would get embarrassed because, you know, he was the key was cast in that role. You know, and going on an adventure and meeting a young woman and, you know, falling in love. I think, you know, it was good that they came from Korea. My mother was really happy being Korean. In fact, she never changed her citizenship. She could have gotten an American citizen because there was a minister here at the Baptist church who was teaching citizenship, and she went to that course, and many ladies got their citizenship. But she said, "I'm Korean, and I will remain Korean." I think, you know, I'm proud to be a Korean, you know, proud of my heritage.